Hi, welcome to the I Heart Africa Project podcast. My name is Nikki, I run the I Heart Africa Project. Today on episode 7, I am busting myths and misconceptions around Africa and travel. And to help me do that, I am talking with Shane Ross. Now Shane travelled solo around Africa for 2 years, for the most part in Little Red, a bright red Suzuki Samurai. It was during this time he began building a formidable wildlife photography portfolio, as well as undergoing guide training near Cape Town in South Africa. Combining his love of the outdoors, his ecological and environmental management background, an extensive travel history, an adventurous spirit, and a love of Africa and all that it encompasses, he began guiding small groups of people from all over the world on safari adventures in South and Eastern Africa. But Shane actually grew up in Cape York, in the far northern part of Queensland, Australia. And this is where his love of the outdoors and exploration began. Now this is what makes this podcast episode very special, because you have a Kiwi and an Aussie talking about the myths and misconceptions around travelling in Africa, or what is referred to as the Dark Continent due to the media's portrayal of Africa. For those who have travelled to Africa, you will know how life-changing the experience can be. But for those who haven't been, it can be hard to understand what it is really like, thanks to the many misconceptions filtered, and great thanks mostly to the media's portrayal of the Dark Continent. In fact, it is not a dark continent, but one filled with troubles just like any other country in the world, but it is a place full of rich diversity and warmth. The truth is that the overwhelmingly majority of travellers to the continent actually return home without encountering any problems. There is a rawness to Africa, and that to me is what makes it the most incredible continent on earth. But unfortunately, bad news sells, and it is not surprising that a lot of people who have never been to the continent don't know anything good about it. But don't let the negative stories stop you from having what could be arguably become one of the most amazing travel experiences you'll ever have. Now Shane is such an incredible person with a vibrant and inspiring energy, so it is my absolute pleasure to welcome today Shane Ross. Hi Shane.
Hi Nikki.
For those listening, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. G'day folks, it's Shane Ross here. I am the expedition leader and founder of Raw Worldwide. It's a bit of a mouthful. But we run safaris throughout Africa, especially Southern and East Africa, Botswana and Tanzania particularly. I'm also a nature photographer of a long time, and that sort of fits under Shane Ross Photography. And then do a bunch of other bits and pieces all over the world with a plan to eventually run adventurous exploration trips and expeditions all over the world. So,
Awesome. Alright, so now let's get into it. Misconceptions and myths of travelling to Southern and East Africa. So we're going to start with under a big title of Africa is a country and is one big jungle. So the first point we have under that one is once you have been, you have seen everything, it is one big country.
Yeah, I'm excited to get my teeth into this issue with you as well. It's a pretty topical one, right? So.
Yeah. Anyone who's ever looked at a map of the world will testify that Africa is a continent, not a country. Made up of 54 independent countries, each with its own currency, flag, anthem, history, culture and cuisine. What do you have to say about this?
I totally agree, but that's only because I've travelled a lot of the world and in poring over plenty of maps myself over the many years, I've come to the realisation that Africa is totally a continent and it has many, many countries. I may have been a little bit naive as a kid, but I think I've said to you before, I read a lot of Wilbur Smith books over the years, and he's pretty clear in spelling out the different countries and so on, as are any other novelists that write specifically around Africa. So once you've read any of those sorts of books, or if you follow a doco closely enough, you'll pick up, that individual countries are within Africa as well. A lot of those documentaries, e.g. guerrilla docos, are based just around Rwanda, Uganda and the Congo, whereas we might look at it as all of Africa. It's still they're 3 separate countries, and each of those has their own issues with which we have to face when we go and see something like gorillas. So yeah, it really makes you realise, especially once you've travelled there, that each country is so individual and has its own very different culture. The language groups in each country are incredibly diverse and steeped in and all sorts of incredible history and human evolution. So yeah, once you dig a little bit deeper, you'll totally realise that Africa is a very, very complex place, probably the most complex continent on the planet in terms of culture, at least. And even environment, it's so environmentally diverse based on different plate tectonics and the way that the planet used to be back, in the days of Pangaea, and then splitting into Gondwana and all of that sort of thing. As a bigger picture, Africa is certainly a very diverse landmass now as well. So yeah, that's what I think about it.
All right, so what we're actually addressing, Shane and I, is we're actually addressing myths and misconceptions that have come up on travel forums around the world regarding Africa. So all these points that we're going to be discussing have been posted by individual people. So the next one we're going to look at: there's nothing else to do besides safari, see gorillas, or climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa.
Yeah, so I guess that's the norm when someone thinks about going to Africa, and it traces back to being taught your first words as a child, and your first animals are often African animals as well as those from your home country. Being flipping through picture books with your parents, showing you Africa. It's pretty quick, even as a kid, to assume that Africa is the place you go to see big and impressive animals. So that's kind of hardwired into us from pretty young. But even as an adult, and after many, many years of education and geology and history classes, and then our own paths that we all follow, and as well as that the world travel that we all eventually potentially go on, we can still come under that impression that Africa is the place you go to just for safaris and to climb Kili, but so much more than that. And
I mean, Mozambique has some of the best beaches. You've got Zanzibar, Mafia Island, Shekels. You've got Madagascar with so amazing beaches. You've got diving in Mozambique. You've got diving with great white sharks off Cape Town. You've got all kinds of water sports, canoeing, kayaking, kite surfing, you name it, hiking and bike trails. They have the best wine in South Africa. Food tasting is just phenomenal, and they're so rich in culture and history, and every country, even every region of every country is so different. So, I mean, it really has something for everyone, not just if you want to go and see animals.
Absolutely, yeah, and a lot of it comes back to even human evolution, early human history, and now the split into different language groups and how different tribes have come together or fought over the years, and it's all sort of ended up in a result of different languages themselves have changed, and then the foods have changed, and the access to different resources have changed over time. So where back in the day it would have been more typical to eat elephant or a plains antelope of some sort, and our culture's changing, and we have to include different species in there, like goats and cattle. So the whole culture shifts, everything changes, and it's all just so diverse. And that's just the food culture. South Africa on its own has 11 different language types, or 11 different language groups, I should say. And within each of those, there's a very different style of living and a different type of, the habitations are different. The way people look are different because they've had different histories. The whole part of it is just incredible. And then South Africa is one of 54 countries. So multiply that across, and you can just imagine how diverse and how incredible it is. And there is absolutely something for everybody there. So yeah, it's incredible.
Absolutely, it's just so rich and diverse. It's hard to explain to someone that's never been.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the hardest part, right? And it's hard enough on any other travel, if you go to Europe and you come home and you want to explain how special something was, it's hard enough to do. But to come home from Africa, and the reason that I think it grabs people so strongly is it's that diversity and that difficulty in being able to explain something if you haven't seen it firsthand. It's so life-changing. It's such a shift in the way that you think, and just witnessing these things, it's incredible. Yeah, it's something else. So
yeah. And so when people actually go to Africa, I mean, to a lot of people, when you say, show me a photo of Africa, they're going to show you, one of a couple of places. They're going to show you a picture of the Masai Mara, the Serengeti, Kruger National Park, and these are some of the top destinations that are on tourist lists for safari locations. Why are these places, the top destinations, and why is there more to these countries than just these destinations?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of it comes down to going back to early settlement and European, settlement over the whole of Africa, and going back hundreds of years, we can see different, I can't think of the word now, I'm going to have to figure it out, basically like empires. So go back 100 years and you can see different empires basically managed or own certain parts of those lands. So Belgium, France, England, they all own different parts of Africa in a sense, or they all seem to basically call it their land as part of their discovery. And then we fast forward a couple of hundred years and we can see the influence that those certain cultures of, France or England, for example, have had on those local populations. For example, East Africa was quite heavily settled by Germans earlier on, and then later on was taken over by Britain. And that influence now has really changed the way that whole area has developed, essentially. So, and if we look at the areas that are marketed most, and that's pretty much the reason that people go to certain areas, is that they're just better marketed than other places. Some have got spotlights on them because they're absolutely fantastic, but also because people have been going there for hundreds of years. And then at the same time, there's other places that are totally still secret and still off the maps, and that's beautiful too. There's perks to each. But of the two examples, so South Africa itself and then East Africa, they've pretty much become the two main safari destinations in Africa. And there's the reason that basically Dutch settlers have been in South Africa and Southern Africa since 1652, so going back 400 years. And then East Africa's had British colonisation there for a couple of hundred years, and that has really influenced the way people see it. So safari, what we used to call it, was basically like a hunting safari. And the Big Five is a hunting Big Five, not a Big Five as we know it today. And that's buffalo, black rhino, lion, leopard, and African elephant. Mm-hmm. And those five were basically on the list of every big game hunter. Back in the day, you were tested against them because those five were the most dangerous animals to hunt in Africa. We've seen a shift in that now it's about conservation, and that shift happened 50 plus years ago by some incredible conservationists back in those days. And now we've seen a shift to safaris around photography and just animal viewing, and less about the actual hunting, and that's amazing. So that's done great things for tourism and local economies. But that's when we see places like East Africa and South Africa really thrive, because they've been receiving that economy and that interest for so long. Somewhere like Botswana, for example, that's basically in between, it's landlocked and it's in between those two locations. It has its own incredible diversity. It's got the biggest inland delta in the world, feeding into the top western corner of the country. And that in itself, because it's such a unique sighting or a unique location, and because of the certain wetland wildlife that attracts, that's a huge safari destination for people now. But 200 kilometres away, less than that even, 100 kilometres away, you can be in desert. So it's one of those places where, it comes down to the way they're marketed over the years. I'd say South Africa, now Botswana, a little bit of Zambia, and then East Africa, as in Kenya and Tanzania, have had a lot of interest. But, there's a lot of parts that don't get the interest then as a result, because those places have had all of the marketing. So Botswana has the Delta, but right next door it has Central Kalahari Game Reserve. To the south, bordering South Africa, it's got the Kalahari Transfrontier Park, and several others around there as well that are all really spectacular. But I think what most people end up doing is they're like, okay, let's go and have a safari, and then let's see the gorillas, and then let's see Kili. If that's, most people don't even do three, most people just do one, and then they get sent in and they do this particular safari, and they fly in and they do that safari, say in Tanzania, they fly into the central Serengeti, and then they fly straight back out again via Ngorongoro Crater, and then they fly home, and then they come back with this snapshot of, like, this is exactly what Africa is like. Mm-hmm. But they haven't seen the culture and the streets. They haven't had the chance to go and see all the other important issues. They haven't driven through, for example, the massive plots of coffee beans that are, the coffee that's grown there. There's a lot of things that get missed if you just do a fly-in, fly-out safari and you don't see all of that other stuff. So I guess that comes back to a bigger message, and we can get to it later too, but it's all about doing your research before you go and knowing that there are so many amazing things to see in each country on its own. I think a lot of people fly in and think, I'll do a week in Zambia, and then I'll do a week in Botswana, I'll do a week in Tanzania, and then it's not that. It's like, Kruger and then Okavango Delta, and they think that they're all really close together, but logistically they're hours and hours apart, and a lot of them require flying back to Johannesburg in South Africa as a base. So it's literally 6 flights to do 3 spots in 3 weeks. It's just incredible, and those take many hours. So It's no small feat, but lots of people, I think, would get overwhelmed by that pretty quickly. So the more research to do before you go, the better off you are at seeing the best of the best that you want to see while you're there, making the most of it, whatever time you have.
Yeah, and it almost comes back to, like, once you've been once, you have seen everything. That misconception, like, once you have been once, you have not seen everything. There is no possible way.
No, absolutely not. And you do it everywhere you go in the world, right? Like, you'll go to Greece and you'll fly to Santorini and see that, and the blue and the white washed buildings and that big crater, and you'll go, I've been to Greece. You're like, well, no, Greece has a lot more going for it. There's mainland, there's all sorts of things. Africa is exactly the same. Tanzania is a great example. Lots of people will just go to the Serengeti, and in Kenya they'll just go to Masai Mara because that's what we see in Nat Geos. But actually, you've only seen maybe 5% of the whole country, and you've only seen it in a drive in and a drive out, or a fly in and a fly out. You literally haven't had the chance to see all the other beauty and all the other, wonderful chaos that's out there. That it's just so fantastic that it's worth spending all of your time in, say, one country per trip. And, if you've got 4 weeks, spend it all in one place. Find a guide that can take you to multiple destinations in one trip, and that'll give you the best bang for your buck. Find a guide or a provider that will take you from the main town that you start in and then out, and drive around and actually get to see things. Go on a bit of an adventure, make it feel like a proper safari, make it like an out of Africa experience, like that old movie, and throw yourself into the shoes of those people back then, and it makes you feel like you are on an authentic exploration. You're the first one to see it. You're on a real adventure. You have your lunch on the bonnet of the car that is your vehicle, and it's your one way to get into a place and out of it. If anything goes wrong with that car, that's your transport, in trouble. And that adventure really makes it feel like Africa. And if you don't have that, if you just do a very plain fly in, fly out, obviously everything you do there is still going to be spectacular. But I think you owe it to yourself and you owe it to Africa to just take a step back and go, geez, there's a lot out there to really see. I need to give it time, and I need to give it all of my attention because it's just so worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Now, you travelled solo around Africa for 2 years, but I don't know about you, but I didn't tell my family until 2 weeks before I was going. I had quit my job about a month beforehand, and I told my family on purpose only 2 weeks before I went. Now, in that 2 weeks, I had heard the most unreal horror stories in my whole life. This was one that really, I just thought, no, that can't be real. But it was in the back of my mind when I landed in Johannesburg. It was that when you land in Johannesburg, the aeroplane will pull onto the tarmac. You have to stay seated until the armed guards walk out onto the tarmac with their guns. They load all the passengers onto a transit bus, and then the transit bus slowly goes back towards the terminal with the armed guards running alongside it, escorting the passengers. Now, obviously, when I got to Johannesburg Airport, we exited the plane like you would at any other airport. I got into the airport, went through the passport control, picked up my bags, and exited without even seeing one airport security staff. So, is Africa dangerous to travel to? Let's have a look at that one. I mean, in 2018, there were 10 million tourists to South Africa, 2 million tourists to Zimbabwe, and 2 million tourists to Kenya. As with many destinations around the world, there are areas that should be avoided. But, I mean, like you said, you need to research your destination. Look, if you go looking for trouble, you're going to find it. That's my best advice. You need to pay attention to your surroundings. Don't attract unwanted attention. And when in doubt, don't, if you know what I mean. Like, Botswana, Namibia, Malawi and Ghana are some of the most stable countries on the continent. And Morocco and Kenya and Tanzania have been huge tourist hub for years. What is your thoughts on people that come to you and say Africa's dangerous?
I had a pretty similar experience actually when I was leaving to come over. I spent 9 months planning over many years of inspiration, but 9 months of solid planning before I came, just because I actually wanted to take a one-way flight to Africa and then spend some time there. So I needed to line up, research lots of stuff particularly, and then line up how I'd be able to see Africa for potentially up to 3 years was my originally plan. I did intend to go over there and buy a motorbike and do, go up West Africa and then come back down through East Africa and do the whole big loop, basically, that long way round, long way down sort of motorbike trip that those Ewan McGregor did back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I only told my family I was going to Africa about a month out as well, and that's just because I'd travelled before, and other things, I'd found that if I told people too far in advance, I'd get smothered with that negativity and that you'll die concept. It almost doesn't matter where you go in the world, you're going to get faced with that.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's always going to. I think a lot of it comes from a place of someone else's uncertainty and basically like it's either whatever it is, lack of confidence or whatever reason, wherever place that comes from. It's not meant to come out bad, but it comes out as basically like your life will be in danger. They love you, so they care about you and they want you to be mindful. But it's like, seriously, I just did 9 months of research. I know totally what I'm walking into.
Mm-hmm.
But then the moment I flew into Africa, I was like, wow, this is nothing like what I thought it was going to be like. Exactly like you say, it's very normal. It's very Western in a lot of ways. You walk off the plane just like you do anywhere else. And I felt very safe from the moment I landed. I was a bit intimidated just walking into that hall in Johannesburg, but not in the sense of, it's just busy, and it's busy because that's what Africa's like. It's just the groups of people that are there to welcome their friends and family they haven't seen for years, sort of thing. So what might look initially like a lot of people is actually such warmth, and every time I go back in there, Johannesburg's one of those places in the world I love to go, and you just walk back in and it's almost like the moment you're off the plane and you walk into the arrival hall, you just have this, it's a beautiful big breath, and you just go, I'm back. And it's back because that's where the warmth starts, that first moment in that arrivals hall. Mm-hmm. And Africa is like that the whole time. Yes, it can be dangerous. Yes, there are places you need to be wary of. We've spoken about in the past, for example, for Australians, and it's the same for Kiwis and anyone else travelling anywhere internationally, basically. But we've got our own travel advice website, smarttraveller.gov.au. Basically, it's thrown a lot of Africa into the more negative and the more dangerous end of the scale. So I remember looking at those in my initial planning and just going, every one of them basically says either reconsider your need to travel, do not travel, or exercise a high degree of caution. All totally alarmist, all totally pessimistic in terms of that, that it just instills that thought of threat and danger in you from the start. And I know that's the idea, to try to be like, just be careful, but it can also scare you off, and it doesn't need to. Again, if you follow the Smart Traveller website for Aussies and the same for Kiwis or whoever is travelling, whatever your local customs and immigration and embassy sort of advice is about travelling overseas, if it says reconsider your need to travel, maybe you can, but maybe there's parts where that ruling, that example isn't the case. So make up your own mind, do the research, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like you said, I travelled for pretty much 3 years, or 2 years full-time over 3 years, 2 separate trips, covered 100,000 Ks and zigzagged through every nook and cranny and corner of 10 countries, basically all of southern and most of East Africa, in order to visit each different park and to see what people are like in different villages and to learn the language and to try the different foods. I did it initially hitchhiking, which obviously everyone says you can't do that. I totally disagree. There's ways to do it safely. You've obviously got to be switched on, and you've got to think ahead and just always have your wits about you, basically, like always have a little bit of switched on going on. But yeah, it's totally fine. I hitchhiked through Mozambique at a potentially what other people would have thought was a really dangerous time, and I met some of the warmest people I've ever met in my life there. Same in Malawi, same in Tanzania. I was in Tanzania and then in Kenya at different times when they both had political rallies going on just before election. And again, those websites will say, do not travel or reconsider your need to travel.
Especially around elections, yeah.
Especially around elections, and that's fair. There might be a little bit of unrest, but we totally just see, it's like if you watch the news too much, you're just going to have a fear complex 24/7 because you're worried about just hearing the absolute bleakest story, and it's all the bleakest and the most chaotic stories get the likes and the follows, but that's not what this is about. This is about using your own perception, using your own gut feel and a little bit of experience, asking people in the know, and then forming your own opinion is what you've really got to do. And then you go, okay, sweet. In that 3 years of travel throughout Africa, and now since then I've done another 2.5 years of travel there through running my own safari business there, I never had a moment where I felt truly threatened or truly worried for my life. There were certain moments that I did certain things that I learned from and I won't do again, but one of those was I'd learnt to become a guide. I'd learnt to drive around animals, and a lot of that is learning animal behaviour and how an animal will react to certain things that you do and vice versa, and just knowing how to deal with a situation on the fly and using that gut instinct and that personal experience to make a call. And one of those situations was I was driving with another guiding friend in Botswana, and we came around the corner and we found this hippo out of the water at 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's not normal for them. Usually they'll be back in the water by, say, 7 o'clock. Like, basically, when the sun comes up, they get back in the water after feeding on grass all night. But when they're out of the water, it's when they're most at threat, basically. So what we did was, I was driving and I approached it and sort of gave myself about 20 metres distance from him. I was a big, mature lone bull covered in scars, and I just wanted to get a closer look at him, and it's the first chance I'd ever had to kind of, I guess, approach them on my own terms and go, I wonder if they are as bad as they say.
Oh, man.
And yeah, you kind of, and that's part of learning too, right? There is an element of risk, and you do sort of push yourself, and you just go, okay, it's obviously every animal has a different personality too, but this particular fella, he'd obviously had a hard time, and he had a short temper, and if you look really closely, you could see his eyes were a bit bloodshot, and it just looked like he was in a foul mood. And I did pick up those signs. In order to have that experience with him, I kind of just gently ignored them a little bit and softened them, and we got a little bit closer than that 20-minute mark, and he charged. But what he was doing was just a bluff charge. He was just basically saying, you're totally in my space right now, get out of here. And he stopped about 5 minutes short. But my instinct, my reaction was to drive off, and I've learned, don't drive off. Whenever an animal is in that close amount of space and that confrontation, you really shouldn't ever have to drive. It'll only trigger them worse. And I just instinctively reacted. I went to drive off and I stalled the car. Luckily I did. Because if I hadn't stalled the car, he may have closed that distance, and it may have triggered him to charge and actually commit to a proper charge. Yeah. Whereas all he was doing was just bluff charging. It's what a lot of the time, and again, it's that false media. We'll see a video of an elephant charging or a buffalo charging or a rhino or a hippo or any of those bigger animals, even a lion, and we totally think, oh my God, if it had kept coming, it would have got us. But I don't know what the stats are, but it'd be something like plus 90% of the time, that's just a bluff charge. That's just a wanting to say you're in my space. You would do it if someone, especially right now in the times that we're having, if anyone came within that 1.5 metres of distance, you'd totally be like, get out of my space.
Yeah, because we're all in our 2-metre bubbles, yeah.
That's right, and they're exactly the same. It's their life, it's their world, and you're suddenly driving that close to them and pushing their buttons, and you've got to really be able to read behaviour. So I guess that's one lesson as well, is if you choose a guide, especially if you're going over to Africa for the first time, go with a guide, go and learn how to read animals, go and learn how they walk, because each animal walks differently, which means they run differently, which means they feed differently, and all the behaviours, the ethology, the behavioural study of those animals is what guides do. And they learn that stuff so they can react and they can make a call if anything's dangerous to their clients. But they also do it because and much more so because they're learning the nature of that animal. It helps for interpreting that behaviour to the client, because that's what they want to know about. Yep. And it also, that's why you're there. You're there for a safari. You want to know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Guides know that stuff. They learn that stuff for a reason. So yeah, basically, like I said, that whole time, my whole time in Africa now, almost 6 years all up, I've never felt threatened in any way. I've had moments like with that hippo charge where I was a little bit worried, but I didn't. Even though I did stall the car, I still knew that we would have been able to get out of that situation in some ways, because I had put certain things in place to be able to keep us safe, basically. So
Yeah.
I didn't step out of the car and walk up to it. I stayed in a car that's basically a safe steel box that's going to keep you away from them. So there's a lot to that bigger picture, but yeah, there's stories about how...
We're going to get into the wildlife in a minute, because we got all that to address, because, wildlife is one of the biggest misconceptions around. So we'll just, we'll bring that rabbit hole down in a minute. But I'm with you on that. The thing is, I never felt unsafe once. I had one incident where a scorpion decided it liked my toast better than I did. And that was a nice welcome to the bush, but it was only a baby, so, But to a New Zealander, that was quite, oh my goodness, what is that? But it was exciting, as well as a little bit scary, but I was not in danger. And, the only other time I had a little bit of an issue was with a lion. And it's because a lion had breached a fence where it wasn't supposed to be, and I'd been out walking, which you're allowed to do, and I hadn't passed anyone, and I was wondering what the hell's going on, because I hadn't passed anyone, and this is a viewing into Kruger National Park, so it's populated, and I walked for about 3 k's and I hadn't passed a single person, and I knew something was wrong, and then I stumbled upon a lion paw print walking along the top of the fresh vehicle tracks, and I thought, okay,
Holy.
There's a bit of an issue here, and so the grass is higher than me because I'm a shorty, and so I don't think I've ever walked so fast, turning in 360s for about 3k home, and I think I made it in about record time. But yeah, crazy. But I once again never ever felt unsafe, and if I had come across one, I don't know what I would have done, but if I had, who knows, but it was safe, it is advised that you can walk, however, things do happen, but I was never in danger, and I promptly, as soon as I was alerted to the issue, I promptly got myself out of that situation, and that comes with knowledge of travel as well. Like, I've travelled to other parts of the world and been in sticky situations, and you just remove yourself from the situation. So, but never ever once did I have a problem with another person or anything like that. So, but an interesting thing, while we're on the subject of landing in Johannesburg, I recently read something on Facebook. Her answer to someone said, I want to go to Joburg for a holiday, is it safe? She's like, if you must go to Johannesburg, hiring a security guard is a good idea. It is extremely reckless that these butt-hurt people are encouraging you to go and risk your safety like this. I don't...
Yeah, crazy.
I think that's just one of those people that just sit there on those travel forums and put that negativity into people who are wanting these amazing experiences. And it's sad because these sorts of comments are what stop people from going.
Yeah, that's almost a dream just snuffed out in one message, like, imagine who reads that and just goes, oh, well, I can't go to Johannesburg. Well, do I need to go to Africa? No, it's just not right. Like,
no, on day one.
And there's a lot of those people who walk that line of caution too much, and it's one of those things, like, if you don't step outside of your house, yeah, there's potentially risk around every corner, but you just don't live your life if you spend all your time worrying about every little thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now one for you, since you've driven all over the continent, just about. If you're driving, don't stop at any traffic lights or on any roads, and don't stop to help anyone. What do you reckon about that one?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, but it's one that you hear often. It's probably the one you hear most often when you're in South Africa, especially there. Anyone you talk to who's from Johannesburg or Pretoria or anywhere in that part of South Africa, or for example even Cape Town, yeah, they'll say, whatever you do, don't stop at the robot, don't stop at the red light, basically. That's the local term for it. And they don't want you to stop there because they basically say, oh, you'll totally get robbed at the lights. Say, well, I've never ever had that happen to me, and I've driven again for years through Africa, and I've not had that happen. Not to say that it doesn't happen. Yes, it totally does. There's reports of it happening, but everywhere in the world, even your home city, your home country, your hometown, still has a possibility and a high likelihood that there is some version of crime going on there. And if we look that closely at that sort of thing, then you'd never leave your house.
Yeah.
That's just not how you look at things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one. There's certain things you can do just to keep yourself safer and sort of keep your peace of mind a little bit better. If you're driving through Johannesburg, you're on your own, it's for the first time you're over there, then a lot of people will close the windows and lock the doors, and that's fine. That's just like you would drive around home. You're just taking that element of surprise and that element of risk out of everyone else's hands. You're totally in control, and that's perfectly fine. I came back, I was doing my tracking course in northern parts of, about 3 hours north of Johannesburg a few years ago. And I was on my own in Little Red, the little Suzuki Samurai I used to drive around in, that I still own, by the way. And I was coming back in after a really hectic few days of, or basically a week and a half of intense tracking training. I was racing to get to a mechanic in town because there was only one Suzuki guy that would fix my car. Anyway, I was coming back into town and I'd heard those things, don't stop in Johannesburg. There's signs in certain areas saying this is a high crime area. Don't stop your car on the side of the road, you will be robbed. Like, that's a bit alarmist on its own, you know. Basically, I was coming back in and I saw this bucky, this truck pulled over on the side of the road, and there were two guys there leaning over this other guy that was laying on his back on the ground. I was like, oh my God, I wonder what's going on there. And like, probably because of all this media that you get, you think, oh, maybe that's something bad going down. And I looked and I was like, nah, that guy's getting resuscitated. He is, you know, these other two guys are helping him. So I got a few hundred meters down the road before I could stop, turned around and raced back and parked the car, rushed over to them quickly, and then I'd had my first aid training, so I ran through the process. Have you called first aid? Have you got this and that coming? So we went through I kept super calm and went through the whole process. And then one of the guys was doing the CPR, the breaths, and the other guy was doing the pressure on the chest. And basically the guy that was doing the presses on the chest, he was exhausted. He was going red in the face. He was the hunting guide turned out there was a hunting guide and he had two older clients, and one of them had a heart attack in the back of the car.
Oh, great.
They pulled over in a hurry on the side of the road, pulled him out, started to give him CPR, but the guide was a bigger fella and he was having trouble keeping up, and they'd been going for 10 minutes, and the whole time hundreds of cars, thousands of cars had passed them and not a single one stopped because of that. You do not stop on the side of the road. So I'd stopped there, pushed this guy out of the road, I took over and then calmly went through everything, and we worked it all out and just went basically, okay, let's keep going, and we managed to keep him going for a while. Turns out he didn't make it, but the whole part of the story is that I was there for probably another 15, 20, I don't even know, maybe 30 minutes before paramedics arrived, and in that whole time nobody stopped, not a single car stopped. And it was pretty obvious that these guys are in trouble. They had a guy dying on the side of the road and people just drove straight past them. You couldn't imagine that happening anywhere else, but it's just that mentality. And while it's up to you to make that call, it just, crazy to not help those guys out.
Interesting. All right, so the next one. Women cannot travel alone in Africa, and women are targeted for like attacks, for robberies, and they're also targeted in the evenings. Do you have anything you want to say before I address this one?
I'll let you get into the nitty-gritty of it, but I've got one quick story, and that is I had a lone female client booking with me this year, an Australian, and she asked me all those questions. Is it safe to travel on your own? And my answer was, it was a bit more of an informed and longer answer, but basically, yeah, it's totally safe if you do these things, and you just need to be mindful of this and this and this. One of her questions was, can I stay in Johannesburg? And I was like, yes, totally can. Go to this area, do these particular things. Don't do this because this will put you in a bit of risk, but you'll be totally safe. And she committed to coming on a safari with me from Australia, having never met me, but we had several phone calls. We had several moments of a chance to really show her or instill in her trust that she could trust me and the information I was giving her, and that was the turning point for her.
Yep.
If she'd listened to the general voice on the street about it, she probably wouldn't have gone to Africa. So I'm totally stoked that that's still happening. That's
perfect.
So she will, yeah.
All right. So my answer for this is really quickly one word: yes. Yes. It is perfectly safe for women to travel solo, Southern and East Africa. Many women I know personally through interviewing and also through connections have done it without any hiccups. But there are a couple of points I want to make about this. Okay, the first one is to all the females listening out there that think they can't travel through Africa alone. Let's put it this way. Think about where you live now, wherever you are in the world, and ask yourself a question. Would you walk around alone at night time and feel safe out on the street? Like, going from hotel to restaurant, say 10 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning from the pub to your hotel home or anything like that, would you feel safe? And the second question you need to ask yourself is, would you be okay if you were drunk and alone and had to walk home in the town that you currently live in? My guess is that most of you would have said no to both of those questions, because my answer is definitely no to both of those questions. And I live in a little town in the middle of New Zealand. So now, why would you, if you say no, then why would you go and do it in a place that you are visiting that you may not speak local dialect or know where you're going or know the streets or know anyone? And then if something does happen, then you blame it on the crime rate. It's this or this, not that you put yourself in an unsafe situation. I mean, we're not blaming you at all. You know, you should be able to walk these places, but the reality of things is you can't get drunk and walk home alone at 3 o'clock in the morning through a darkened alleyway, no matter where you live. And that's just the reality of it. So I just have some little advice. Don't get drunk. Don't walk alone at night. Trust your intuition, and just as you would where you live now. And there are actually really great female-only safari companies and tour companies, including one in Australia that runs an annual trip up Mount Kilimanjaro. So if you are worried but you want to stick with women, there are some fantastic female-only tours. So that is my advice. You know, it's just one of those things, you have to use common sense. If you wouldn't do it where you live, why would you go and do it somewhere else?
Yeah, that's great advice, Nikki, for sure. I'd totally say the same thing. So, yeah, spot on. And there are some really great, it's good that you mentioned it, there's some great women-only trips over there. There's one in particular with Penny Robart and Oryx Safaris. Yeah, if any ladies out there are looking for a safari and a ladies only, that's one example. And there are bunches of them. So I've met her and she's an absolutely fantastic guide and super switched on and just really passionate. So, yeah, that'd be a totally great place to start looking anyway. So.
Yeah. Okay, now this is a question for you. This was also from a travel forum, and it was basically just, they wrote, do not visit native townships. And go.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of, this is a tricky one because everyone gets hung up on race and racial, all sorts of things, and I think you've just got to let all of that stuff go and just value people for who they are and how you meet them and all of that stuff. So the people have totally stereotyped someone and said, don't go into these townships. That's not fair. I run my safaris from, this is just an example and it'll make it a bit more understandable, but I run my safaris from a town called Arusha in Tanzania, that's one of them, and then the other one is from Maun in Botswana. Both of those towns are quite safari-heavy towns, but they're also very cultural. They're very, Tanzania and Arusha is very Swahili language-orientated still. It still has a very strong linkage to the Maasai and the Ma language. Samburu, all sorts of different cultural types up there. And Maun's the same. It's got both the locals as well as it's got that Bushman influence as well. And if you just stereotype and say you can't go into townships, that's just not, it's not fair. It's not right. It means that you totally just looked at something as one little bubble and that's it. And so I deliberately, on both of my tours, I include or all three of my tours, I should say, I include a very strong cultural and town-based element on the first day. And we call it the Famil Day because I think that everyone should have a taste of the culture in which they're flying into before they go out and have the reward of the wilderness, because you must understand that while humans evolved after the majority of other animals that we're going to see out in the wild now, it's still not fair to bypass the human side and miss the culture and all of that, because you just miss such a valuable part of what is Africa.
Yeah.
And Africa is the diversity of the people as well as it is of the landscapes and the wildlife. So both of my tours totally take in those townships. There's certain elements you need to be mindful of, and that comes back to that own sense of self and just taking a look and going, oh, maybe I shouldn't go down there. I went to one of the most stunning beaches I've ever seen in South Africa, and I went to a really well-known hole in the wall, I think it's called, somewhere on the garden route. And I went to go down or the Wild Coast, I'm not sure which one it was, but I went to check out this spot, and I felt that someone was watching me, and this sense is really well honed in me now because I've spent so long in the wild in Africa as well. I just felt that someone was watching me. I turned around and I noticed that there were a couple of guys sort of on the hills, and they were looking at me, and as soon as I looked back at them, they kind of looked over at different spots, like they pretended not to be looking at me, and I was like, I'm not going to that spot today. I don't get a good feeling from what these guys are up to. I think that because I'm probably the first person on the beach in the morning, I've got a flag that says tourist because I've got a backpack on and whatever else, they were totally looking me up and down and going, there's a potential opportunity.
Yeah.
But you can be in the middle of Arusha, in the middle of 1,000 people. I go and buy all of my vegetables and fruit for my trips from the busiest market in Arusha because it's got the best fresh stuff. It's locally owned. I'm supporting locals when I do it. It feels good. It's a cultural experience, and it's overwhelming in the sense of like the colours and the sounds, and it's just so fantastic that if you want to miss out on that and just, you know, like online order everything all your life, you're just never going to experience what the real life is actually about. So yeah, it's a total myth. Break that one down. Yeah, and the places like, I mean, we mentioned, you know, human colonisation and Eastern, like basically European colonisation in places like East Africa, e.g. Tanzania and Kenya. There's been tourism there for a couple of hundred years, whether it's hunting tourism at the start, and now it's safari, or photographic and normal animal safaris. But I think we quickly get intimidated by people seeing us, especially travellers, but seeing any tourist as an opportunity, because they've done that for hundreds of years, literally. Like, they've learned that there's an opportunity for taking someone on a safari because that's what we're there for. We'll pay for that. There's money because, you know, we're wanting to buy food and drink and have that experience. So I think we quickly get scared of something like that when we should actually go, let's just hear them out and let's see what's going on, and then we can make a judgment. Yeah. And, you know, there's times that I'll say, no, I'm not interested, because it's, you know, you have to be true to yourself, and if it's not what you want, then it's not what you want. But yeah, you've just got to totally make that judgment call, and you'll be totally fine.
Yeah. All right. What about you need a lot of money to travel through Africa? It's just like any other country, I think. You can do it any way. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can totally. It comes down to how you've budgeted for your trip, how much time you've got, and then how much research you do before you go, basically. So when I first went over, I chose to do a guiding course, which was all inclusive, and then I didn't have to worry about any other expenses, and that's the reason that I chose the particular course that I did, my guiding course, and that was everything. I didn't need to pay any other money, so that solved. When I left there, I hitchhiked up the east coast of Africa through Mozambique, Malawi, and Tanzania for about 2.5 months. And I was living on about $20 a day, including transport. So I basically come out of the course and I was like, okay, sweet, I'm going to save some cash. And it was super cheap to eat. You can either buy your own stuff and cook it, or you can go and have local. If you're eating locally at local restaurants, if it's a touristy town, yes, it'll be a bit more expensive because they're used to your money being in those towns. But if it's quiet, backstreets town that doesn't often get tourists, then you're going to get an absolute bargain, and you're going to get that warm heart of Africa feel and the whole thing. So after being on $20 a day, I then met up with some friends in Tanzania, and we went to Zanzibar. So I went from between $20 and $40 a day, including transport costs. I went to about $300 a day, because those guys were, you know, that was a trip of a lifetime for them. Let's go to Africa for the first time. Let's go and experience Zanzibar in an expensive hotel, eating expensive food at that hotel, going for massages and all of that thing. If you want that experience, if you want the 5-star lodge and the Zanzibar beach and the super high-end hotel experience, it's going to cost you several $100s a day. Yeah. It comes down to the way you choose your guide as well. If you're going to go to Africa, especially if you're going for the first time, I'd totally say go with the guide. It helps to have local knowledge, or knowledge of someone who's spent some significant time there and actually experienced it properly. And the perk of going with them is that you get their local knowledge, they show you how to do everything, and then you basically choose, okay, I'm going to choose, you know, a glamping or a mobile safari because it's cheaper, but it's more adventurous. I camp in a tent, but there's still all the same luxuries, and I have a better wildlife experience, versus I go into a lodge and I pay $2,000 a night, US dollars, for a lodge, and I go on game drives at 9 o'clock in the morning after everything's finished moving. You know, it's that stereotype, but basically you can choose anywhere in between there, but they're your two ends, basically. Yeah. The lower end and the higher end, and anything in between, but yeah.
And someone said that on a forum that African accommodation is not up to Western world standards. Now, I must say, no, there's 5-star luxury safari lodges and hotels in the cities in the bush, so that's absolute crap. I mean, if you're expecting to get 5 stars for the price of a 1-star, you're dreaming anyway, so yeah.
I've seen some of the best, probably the best accommodation I've seen in the world in Africa. If there's a demand there for, you know, like gold encrusted bathtubs with the lion claw feet and all the beautiful basins and all the fittings in the whole room, that draping big mosquito net over the luxury bed. If there's a demand for that, you'll find that, and every country has those. So Africa is not Southeast Asia where you can go and get a total bargain for $10, $20 a night. That's just not how it works.
Yeah.
It's themed tourism now for a couple of 100 years. It's just in a very different place. So.
Okay, now this one is all yours. These are 3 questions and I'm going to roll them into one. And this is a pretty big one, actually, because a lot of safaris, a lot of overland adventures, a lot of, just adventures into Africa require some form of camping in a tent. So these are the 3 questions and these are all yours. Is it safe to camp in Africa? Won't the animals come into camp? And can I go to the toilet at night?
This is my favourite question. It's pretty much the reason that we're doing this particular podcast, trying to break the myths around Africa, and it's because the short answer to all those questions is yes, it's totally safe. Yes, the animals may come into camp, but yes, that can be safe as well. And yeah, you can go to the toilet at night. The longer version of that is I've spent the time. When I first went to Africa, I had that misconception that no, you can't sleep out in the wild because you'll get eaten. Basically, I thought from the moment that I landed in Johannesburg, within a short drive, I'd be able to see elephants walking through the bush, and it's not like that. So that's one of those ones you can just break straight at the start and go, okay, well, when I do get into the bush, it's going to be wild. What's it going to be like? So I bought my car to be able to enable driving around and keeping the price down for myself. I bought the car because it's the cheapest way to travel Africa and do it over the period of time that I want to do it, so up to 3 years. And I bought a car and had a breakdown pretty much within the first few days, which then seemed to stick with me for a lot of my trip because even though I know my way around the car pretty well, sometimes it's hard to find parts and so on. But basically I met this guide in Etosha in Namibia, and he came and gave me a bit of a hand to fix those couple of problems that I had with my car that I couldn't figure out. And one of our conversations were around, I asked him, you must camp in the wild pretty often. How do you do it? How did you used to do it? And he's like, mate, we just camp in swags now. I've lived my whole life. This is coming from him. I've lived my whole life in the bush, and I know that even in a swag that I'm safe. And I kind of would have gone all like googly-eyed and was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. But now I've done it for a couple of years myself. I totally understand what he's talking about. So I'd gone to Africa with a very small, at the time it was the most compact or the lightest tent you could buy in the world, I think, at that stage. So it was a one-person tent, and I had that plus a sleeping mat plus a small sleeping bag, and that was my accommodation. And basically, when you're in places that are more developed, like Namibia and South Africa, that have got much more of a Western feel, if you go camping in those reserves, national parks, most of them are fenced. So as soon as night comes, the gates closed. It almost feels like Jurassic Park, like all the big animals are out there and you're safe in this big fence zone, and even that can be a false sense of security. So I spent a few months in Namibia and then ended up in Botswana. My very first night in Bots, I was in Chobe, and I pulled up at this ranger hut, and basically I went into the front desk, and the rangers looked at me and they're like, oh, have you got a rooftop tent? And my car was very visible, and I said, oh, no, I don't. It's obvious that I don't have a rooftop tent. And I said, oh, what are you camping? I said, oh, I've just got a little ground tent. And these are locals, and they looked at me and they're like, oh my goodness, what do you mean? And I was like, it's fine. I've been doing this for months. I know what I'm doing. And then they said, oh, there's been some lions around and they may come into camp. And they came in the other night and they sort of knocked a bit of stuff off tables and stuff at this camp beside you. And I was like, oh, yeah, no worries. I think that's just scare tactics. That it's almost an accountability. They're so worried that they'll be liable if you do something silly that they have to tell you that stuff.
Yep.
And it's how we become nanny states. We're very particular about health and safety because it's all about liabilities. But anyway, I went in that night, and basically the lions called and they came in close to camp, but they didn't come and bother me, but they were trying to alarm me and scare me, and if I had listened to them, I wouldn't have camped there. And that night, that experience I had with those lions was one of the best moments of my whole life. I was totally on my own, but I figured it out and everything was okay. And I've had many nights since then camping in my tent where lions have walked into camp. I had one experience where a lion roared for many hours and then eventually came into camp, and I was in my tent. I had to make the call of staying in my car or getting in the tent, and I decided to stay in my tent and not be a bit of a sook and just lay down there and deal with whatever came. And I knew I would be safe because I'd had all this experience already. Lion came into camp and he literally laid down right outside my tent and then just lay there for about 15 minutes. And I lay dead still and just listened to him breathing right outside. And it was one of the most, it's to this day the most amazing moment I've ever had. So like me and this other incredibly majestic being right outside the tent, we just had a little moment, and then he got up and walked off. No harm done, nothing. He didn't investigate or sniff the tent, nothing, just walked off. Basically the message is, if you're in a game drive vehicle, a lot of people say, oh, you could get plucked out of a vehicle. Total rubbish. A vehicle it looks like a solid steel object to them. They don't have that connection with pulling you out of it or anything like that. That just doesn't happen. Same thing goes in a tent. In a tent, it's like you're in a concrete, imagine it like you're in a steel-clad tent or a concrete sort of enclosure. They don't think that it's as essentially like, a canvas tent isn't maybe as solid as like in our minds we think it's quite weak, but to them it's a solid object. They cannot enter that tent at all. And the stats around that are so slim of any issues that are happening. It's totally fine. So I now lead safaris all through Africa. Those particular ones I mentioned in Tanzania and Botswana. In both of those examples, we've had lions come into camp, leopards, elephants, hippos, the whole lot. And I've never ever had a close call yet. Nothing even close that really worried me. And it's because they're animals. They're just curious, like especially cats. It's the curiosity about them that makes them so impressive. And I've learned now, and that's one of those behavioural ethology things you learn if you're a guide and you watch animals for long enough. Learn why they do the things they do. So I had a group of clients last year, and a lion roared for a couple of hours, and every time he roared, he was a little bit closer. And then pretty much right on toothbrushing time and bedtime, he sort of came into the edge of camp about 200 metres away, and he roared again, and that roar pierces the night. It's such an intense sound. Scared all my clients. One of the ladies jumped in the car, and she was a little bit worried, but once he stopped roaring and everything calmed down, and sort of gave her 10-15 minutes in the car, because that's the safe space as well as tent, and said, you can come out now, everything's cool, and she went to bed in her tent and everything was totally fine. All that cat was doing was he was coming in, we're in his patch, we're in his territory, he just wanted to know what was going on. He didn't come into camp, he didn't hassle anyone, just was totally wanting to know what we're up to. So yes, they can come into camp. It's what they do. These are wild animals. They do what they want to do when they want to do it. If they want to come in, and I've had many times I've been sitting in my tent or I've been away from camp and come back to camp, and there's been an elephant, there's been tracks of an elephant like literally an inch from the edge of my tent, but it's never stood on my tent. It's fed out of a tree above me because for some reason at that stage those pods are ready and that's what he wants to eat, so he's going to come and get them. It's just how it is. If there's a herd of impala on one side of camp and there's a leopard on the other, he might come through your camp. But if you go with a guide, or if you've learned that stuff before you go, you will be totally fine. You just have to be mindful. You have to always be a bit switched on, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, and then with going to the toilet at night, it's the same practice. There's a process of, you shine the light around to make sure that no animals are going to come in, or if they are around, you know what's around, and then you make the call. I set up my toilet system so it is safe and it feels safe, and we have a debrief before the tour starts to say, this is how we use the toilet, this is how we behave at night, and we practice it basically before we get there. So all of that stuff is totally safe and broken down.
Yeah, awesome. That's a great answer. All right, so now we're going to get into a little bit of the crime stuff. So carrying on from is it safe, This is a really quick question thing that was mentioned, that Africa is full of scammers, street hustlers, fake safari companies and fake volunteer programs. That's a really simple one to me, and I think that you can eliminate a lot of that by, one, not attracting unwanted attention and politely just saying no, just being polite but carrying on, or just avoid those areas completely. But for fake safari companies and fake volunteer programs, the safaris, I think if you have video conferences or video calls with your guide several times before you leave, you can eliminate that. Volunteer programs, I'm not 100% sure on because I've never done the volunteerism thing, but it's same again, I'd want to have, I think You should have several video calls, preferably over phone calls, because then you get to see who you're actually talking to. Know the ins and outs. Speak to people that have been on those volunteer programs. If you can't find a review or can't find someone that's been on it, don't go, potentially. But for safaris, easy. Talk to your guide, arrange video calls several times before you go, so you feel comfortable, you know who your guide is, you know who's going to be there when you get off the plane. What do you reckon?
I agree with everything you said. I think it just takes a little bit of perception again, and you will see people that at the arrival halls that look a little bit, in your own experience might look a little bit dodgy, or they come up to you and they want to give you a taxi, and they're not wearing a uniform, so you become a little bit cautious. But a lot of it is just how you behave as well. So
yeah. I
think it's really important that it's about where your eye contact goes. If you don't want unwanted attention, don't make eye contact with every single person. Then you're basically saying to them, come and talk to me, or come and take advantage of me. It comes down to what you wear. If everyone who flies into Africa wears khaki and looks like they're going on, like they're basically wearing a safari outfit from the moment they land, you're just waving a big flag to say, I'm a tourist, I don't know what I'm doing here, it's my first time. So it's the way you dress, it's the way you look at people. Now I've done it for so long, I don't make eye contact unless there's some sort of purpose to it. If I want to say hello to someone, then of course I do that. But it's just a behaviour that you go about. I make sure that I look like I know what I'm doing, even if I don't.
Yeah,
I make sure I look like I know exactly what I want. Because if you look around and you just, like, you walk into Johannesburg Arrival Hall and you kind of look a little bit vacant, they're going to take advantage of you. But that's not there, that's anywhere in the world.
Or you pull out a map.
yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, let's pull out a map in front of everybody, or go straight to like the first person and go, how do I get? No, that's asking for trouble.
I think the big thing with safari companies is people are like, I'll book through a travel agent and it's got to be, legit. Yeah, you can book through a travel agent, that's fine, but you then are eliminating your options of researching these companies yourself. You won't get to meet your guide before you go. You won't get all your questions answered before you go. So, there is value in going to these companies directly, like yourself, and getting, feeling that assurance, knowing what's going to be happening, knowing exactly what you're getting before you get there. So, yeah, that's a big one. All right.
Totally agree,
Yeah. All right. So, you are going to get mugged from the time you land, or you will be robbed at gunpoint at the airport. Do you want to step in first?
We've touched on it quite a lot already, but again, it's another one of those misconceptions. I think we all, and anyone who says, you need security the whole time, it's absolute bollocks. It's ridiculous. Yeah, so I'm going to let you deal with that one. I think it's totally fine. You've just got to, again, always have your wits about you no matter where you travel in the world, and just be sharp and ready for,
And don't flash the newest iPhone in a highly dense, poor populated area where there's poverty, potentially. Don't flash your cash, don't flash your bling bling, be a bit smart about that. But petty crime is prevalent all over the world, regardless of where you are. Okay, so now we're going to look at the myths and misconceptions around health and wellness. So the first thing we're going to look at is malaria. And one of the misconceptions people have about malaria is that it's everywhere. For starters, that's not true. Malaria is not everywhere. It is a seasonal thing, and also it varies location to location. What do you have to say about that one?
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, and again, it's one of those things that people said to me the moment that I said I was going to Africa. They were like, oh my God, there's malaria. Yeah, the one thing I was told when I was first looking at going to Africa immediately was that malaria is everywhere. Exactly the same bit of advice, and it's going to get me basically. There's almost no way, unless I take lots and lots of drugs, that I can get away with it. Even doctors are often misinformed about how bad it is. Yes, they know what the impacts of it are, and if you're talking cerebral malaria, yes, that is definitely a risk. But that's usually the worst case scenario that they focus on instead of what's more prevalent or more likely. And even then, the case of you actually getting it is also still quite slim. So basically, malaria occurs in the tropics. So if you draw a line of Tropic of Capricorn north up to the equator and up to the Tropic of Cancer in the northern hemisphere, that's essentially the area in which malaria can occur. It's a tropical disease, a tropical virus carried by mosquitoes. And there's several of those that are in that area, but there's ways to manage it and prevent yourself from getting it. I've been travelling Africa for now almost 6 years, I've never had it. I met people in Tanzania that are right in the middle of one of the areas where there's a pretty high infection or risk rate, and they've been there for 30, 40 years and never taken anything for it and never got malaria.
Mm-hmm.
So it's another big myth. You get advice to take drugs as well for it, which is doxycycline, which is an antibiotic, I guess, of senses, but it can also make you more, or give you a higher exposure rate to sun, or make more at risk of being sunburned. You take that daily. There's other options that you take once a week, but they say that one makes you crazy. So you will get malaria, but if you take the drugs, you're either going to get really badly sunburned or you're going to go nuts.
Yeah.
So none of those, that's all negative views, that's all pessimistic, and it doesn't need to be that way at all.
Which one did you take?
I took the one that was meant to make you the most crazy when I first went.
Awesome.
That was a one a week called Larry, and I was like, if I'm going to be over there, I may as well go on a bit of a trip as well, and it never affected me at all. So
that's
I think each to their own as well. When I went back last year, actually, when I took clients back in 2018, I didn't take any at all. I felt like I could control the situation well enough, and I'm happy that I came away from that. You know, you wear long sleeve, you put repellent on if there's any mosquitoes around at all, if you think there's any risk, or as soon as nighttime comes, you make sure you lave it up and covered in it. But that's it, that's that problem solved basically. You take it out of their control and you keep yourself safe. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I had a little bit different experience. I was advised by my doctor here to take malaria tablets, and he prescribed me these $140 malaria tablets, and I started taking them a couple of days before I left, and I arrived in Joburg, and that's why I got stuck there, because I went, in the better sense of a word, doolally. I got nausea, I vomited, I was dizzy, I lost all sense of balance. I had visual disturbances, insomnia. Like, people would pass me something and it would slip through my hands. I was incredibly clumsy. I was walking into objects and walls. Like,
wow.
And luckily some doctors from Durban were staying nearby, and I went and approached them, and I got all sorted out, and they laughed when they heard I was on malaria tablets. They thought it was the most funniest thing ever. But, I mean, we're not saying that you shouldn't take them. We're just saying that be aware of the side effects, double check and cross-reference to see if you're going to an area that has malaria, or if you're going into a season where there is a lot of mosquitoes. Last resort, take insect repellent.
That's right, yeah.
We're not saying...
If you're the only place in South Africa you're really going to face it, and South Africa, let's face it, is the main place that you would go on safari to go to Kruger, for example. But Kruger North is potentially malaria risk area. Anywhere south of that, there's pretty much none anyway, because the climate is a lot colder.
Yeah.
So anywhere north, you do have to be aware. But most anti-malarial, it's not a vaccine you can get neither. There is no vaccine for it. You have to take these anti-malarial pills, and then you have to do it on a routine and not break that routine. But you should also take it before you go. So probably a really good practice to do and you're meant to take them for a week or two, depending on what you take before you leave, your doctor should have a chat with you about what you think will affect you. If you think that you might not react to those, then you should be taking doxy. It's the easiest one to take. It has the least amount of side effects apart from the sun exposure, and even that in most people should be pretty negligible. But you should have time enough to take it at home and test it before you go. That would give you a chance, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it would give you a chance to pick up on those potential side effects before you even leave your home country.
Yeah, hopefully. My side effects didn't start till I was there, and it was a couple of days in, which completely threw me. So I can't remember right now off the top of my head whether I started taking them too late or something like that. But yeah, I'm not saying don't take them. You might need them.
I think a really important part of it is just to know how it's actually transmitted. So if you do any research and jump on right now and go on Google, how would I contract malaria? You'll instantly see that the chances of it happening are very slim. The mosquito that bites an infected person has to bite you within the time period for you to even come into contact with them in the first place. So as soon as you're in the bush, essentially as soon as you're out on safari, you're away from people and almost entirely eliminates, apart from the staff that may be on your lodge, the chance of you getting it, and that you would have to get it from someone if they were infected themselves. So it's one of those ones that's, for us, it's unlikely for travellers that you would get it anyway. So
yeah. All right. What about, it's a dirty, disease-ridden place. Make sure you're vaccinated for everything possible.
I would say just go to your doctor again. They're probably going to give you the most extreme version. I went to one who, at the time, wanted to give me absolutely everything, and I think I got 8 or 9 different types of vaccines. But I also chose to take them because I knew I was going to be there for a long time, so my exposure risk was higher. And, for example, I arranged to get my rabies vaccination because I was working with wildlife rehab flying foxes in Australia anyway, so the rabies can help you or can prevent that from any passed on diseases in that spectrum to be passed on to you. But in Africa, I'm an ecologist or a naturalist. I'm also a guide. I like the idea of being a veterinarian as well, in a sense, so I figured that I'd be around animals, and I took that as a preventative as well to basically control as much as I could. So, look, I'd say take the basics, take your Hep A and your Hep B, take typhoid, a few of those that you really need, but don't let them sign you up for absolutely every vaccination, because $10,000 later you'll have had a bunch of jabs and you don't have a shiny car or anything out of it. You just have pain in your left and your right arm and your bum, and that's about it. So
yeah, I know for Kenya you have to prove you have had your yellow fever vaccination.
I should have said that as well. Yeah, I make sure all my clients are aware that they need their yellow fever if they're coming into an area that has it, and Tanzania and Kenya and a lot of those East Africa countries do have yellow fever. So
yeah.
We could totally get hung up on this whole vaccination and health thing. But at the end of the day, you go and get your vaccinations, get your doctor's advice, and then again, make your mind up and you'll be fine. In a lot of checkpoints in Africa, if you fly into any country, for example, they often have a heat scanner, which now in days of COVID, we're seeing those heat scanners checking your forehead for a spike in temperature.
Yeah.
I've never ever seen anyone plucked out of a line that could potentially have had it, so I've never even seen anyone with that temperature spike.
Yeah.
So that's totally fine. And the other one is, when you do get to certain visa immigration customs desks, they will ask you to display your yellow, it's often yellow, your vaccination card.
Yep.
As long as you've got yellow fever on there, I'd say just get that anyway, just in case you end up in another country or an opportunity to go there, and you may as well get yellow fever before you go to Africa. That's the only one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All the food is tribal or ethnic? That's really easy to answer. No.
No. Yeah, that's right.
A lot of these safari lodges, they actually fly in world-class chefs now. Even if you don't go to the the big safari lodges, even in the big cities or the little cities, the food is amazing. Yes, there is tribal and ethnic food you can try if you want to. But there's also fast food chains over there like KFC, and there are restaurants where you can get a steak and fries if you want that too. I know in Cape Town there's vegan restaurants, in Namibia there's vegan restaurants. I mean, the food's world class, so that's just rubbish.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there again. Even in Arusha, where we started our Great Migration trip, there's now a Pizza Hut where I go and buy the shopping market food from, basically. So, there is plenty of Western influence in food there. But at the same time, you should also be trying to try some of the ethnic and local stuff. If you go to a place and you want to have a cultural experience and you don't try the food, you're missing a huge part of that culture. It's it's blocking your ears to the music, or it's not listening to the local language, or it's just, you should really try that stuff. It's pretty amazing. Some of the best food I've eaten in the world is stuff that I've eaten in Africa. Ethiopia has been rated as some of the best food in the world, if not one of the tastiest cultural foods in the world. So yeah, there's plenty of amazing stuff there. And if you go there and you haven't tried it, you're just missing out.
Oh man, I tried everything. And the food over there is just amazing. I have to agree, I've never eaten such amazing food. It's over there.
It's often quite affordable, yeah. So the first meal I take my clients for in Arusha is a huge Indian spread, and it's because there's a lot of Indian influence in East Africa from the trade routes that were established back into Asia back in the day, hundreds of years ago, that now that's one of the important cultural food sources of Arusha, of Tanzanian culture.
Yeah, so the big Middle Eastern,
that's how we start. Yeah. That's where we have our debrief, is over a really awesome Indian meal. And then later on we'll try some Maasai food, later on we'll try some South African food, and you just try everything. And most lodges have a buffet, so you can have your scrambled and your poached eggs and all of your normal stuff, or you can try the mealy meal, the pup, you can try warthog or any of those local meats as well. As long as they're all ideally sustainably harvested, then it's good to go.
Yeah. All right, now we've got 2 for you, specifically to answer, because I know there was a video of you, I'm not saying what you're wearing, running through the bush and no shoes. And I didn't actually go swimming when I was over there, so I can't answer that question from personal experience. So I've got 2 misconceptions for you to answer specifically. You can't swim, you'll get diseases, and you can't walk around barefoot because of worm and diseases. And snakes, obviously.
Yeah, so it's about just being aware of your surroundings, and when it comes to clothing, it's one of those things you've just got to be super mindful of. You should have shoes on when you go out. It's respectful to wear shoes in public. So if you go to a restaurant, you don't just walk in there barefoot. That's pretty grubby. But in some places, it's culturally acceptable or even required to not have shoes. Like, you can't enter certain religious places if you're wearing shoes, as we all know. So, yeah, there's a lot of myth again, and I think I just heard so many myths and nastiness about Africa before I went that I just blocked my ears to the phrases, you can't swim and you can't walk barefoot. I don't even remember being told those things. But when I came back after the first trip, I went to my doctor and I thought, I'll just get a checkup, and she said, did you swim anywhere over there? And I was like, yeah, I swam in Lake Malawi. And she just went, what, you swam? What do you mean? It's so bad there. And I swam in a place that basically it's from locals swimming in the water, and when you've got such a reliable food water source as Lake Malawi, you swim in there every day, and there's a little chance of there being a little E. coli in the water system. And basically anyone who says they've been to Lake Malawi is tested for waterborne diseases, basically, so bilharziasis and a few others along those lines. Yeah, there's a bit of risk there, but again, just do your research before you go and you'll figure that out. But again, if you don't, there's incredible scuba diving opportunities off Mozambique and South Africa and all over the place, in Tanzania as well, everywhere for that matter. If you have a blanket rule that says don't swim, then you're never going to experience those incredible opportunities. I did my dive course in Lake Malawi. I'm a qualified PADI diver now because I did my course there, and it was phenomenal. I felt like I was swimming in a fish tank.
Awesome.
It was just incredible. And if I'd listened to that advice, I wouldn't have done that. I probably wouldn't be PADI certified now. So that's a total testament to, swim, just be mindful. Walking around barefoot, look, I spent a lot of time camping out there, and at the end of the day, when you've been wearing shoes all day, every day, and you're moving around as much as I was, and you just got to take shoes off, and I tended to do it in camp a lot if I knew I was in control of the situation. But yeah, you do have to be careful barefoot. I had a pretty nasty scorpion scuttle over my foot in Namibia once, and there was a parabutid, which is the highest toxicity of all of the scorpions that would have had me hospitalised, and I was barefoot at night time, so that was dumb. I shouldn't have been doing that. And now I have a rule where I make sure I'm wearing closed shoes at night in camp, no matter where I am. That was too much of a close call. I've seen puff adders out there as well, so snakes that especially in this particular park, that if you're wearing closed shoes, you're probably okay, because they tend to bite more around the feet. That said, it's not a blanket rule. I totally still go barefoot in some places, and I feel comfortable doing it. It gives my feet a chance to breathe, and I'm okay with that. So,
but let's just get one thing straight. You have grown up in Australia, where there is a lot of bities as well. So you're just not the average person wandering through the bush barefoot. You've studied, you know snake behaviour, you understand, quite an array of insects and reptiles. So, I mean, yeah, you're not the average person. You're not the average person, Tarzan.
Maybe my feet are a little bit tougher than normal, because I have walked around barefoot a lot, and I just don't love wearing shoes all the time. Yeah. Tarzan, good one.
All right, so now we're going to get into the wildlife aspect of the myths and misconceptions, and these are probably bigger than all others, especially for those who are coming on safari, I reckon. I definitely reckon they're bigger than all the others for people who are coming on safari. So, okay, let's head straight into it. So, 2 things. One of the big myths and misconceptions is that you are going to get eaten by a lion or a leopard or a hyena, and that invokes, the images from the Ghost in the Darkness, Yeah. What do you have to say about that one?
Again, and we kind of touched on it already, but this is my favourite question, and it's the question that I get the most. So, again, I'm a guide, and I make sure that I provide that service to anyone who wants to book with me, is that we have a chat. We have several chats leading up to the trip, so we can break down all these myths, so I can answer your questions and basically say, yes, that's totally reasonable, no, that's a total myth, and just to make sure all of that stuff is as right in your mind as possible, so that when it comes to you travelling, you've got a sense of security and safety, and you know that you're making the right calls and you know what to look out for. So when it comes down to wildlife, the first question I'm asked is, shouldn't we be in a lodge? Why are we camping? Why is the side of the game drive vehicle open? Shouldn't the windows be up? Can't things pluck you out of cars? Won't they come in at night and steal us away? Like you said, the whole Ghost in the Darkness kind of image of, lions doing nasty things. It doesn't happen like that. These animals are all... The animal kingdom is a place where everything exists in such a beautiful balance. Animals they only eat enough to survive. They don't have any malice about them unless they've learnt a bad habit from, e.g., if people feed animals, they can change their behaviour and then they become more bold and they will come into camp. But the general message is that all animals that you encounter out there they have no intention, nor do they associate humans with food and will not come in and cause you any harm. If you're in camp in the middle of the day and you look around you and there's a herd of elephants coming straight from your camp because your camp is sitting in this beautiful grove of trees, that's their decision. They're coming in and they want to have a feed and you're in their way, and they're going to do it right through the middle of your camp whether you like it or not. That is... And I promise that'll be one of the best experiences of your whole trip, is that moment where an elephant came into camp or a hippo was eating grass outside your tent. It's the one thing you're going to come home and tell people first. It's the thing that's going to change your mindset about how nature works and just totally inspire you and change your whole mindset. So while that is the first question I'm asked often, it's also the one that has the biggest impact on people in the long run, in the sense of... I told that story of the lion that came into camp last year on a safari. That moment scared the shit out of those guys. It totally freaked them out because the sound of a lion is so loud. It's loud because they're announcing that this is their territory and they're staking their right, and they're basically saying to other lions out there, this is my patch, where are you? If you're anywhere near me, I'm going to come and have a fight with you because you're kind of in my place. And it's a lot bigger than that. That whole process is, or that behaviour and that practice that they are in is much bigger. But at the end of the day, that's what they're doing. They're just basically advertising, this is my patch. I'm here, where are you? Let's catch up, and then if we have to, we'll battle. But that's all there is to it. There's no nastiness involved. And again, if they do come into camp, it's just because they're curious. Every single animal you can possibly imagine come into my camps in Africa, and I've never once again felt threatened. I've sat and a foot away from my tent, I've watched a hippo chew grass and just sat there and listened to it and watched it, and it was just such an incredible experience to see. This is how the animal behaves normally. You would never get to see that if you go on a game drive during daylight hours. You would never actually see a hippo eating, because they don't do it in the day, they do it at night.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to experience that.
Yeah.
Lions rest for 24 hours every day, so they're only generally active for about 4 hours. That's a general rule, of course. It's not set. They don't watch the clock and go, okay, my 4 hours are up, I'm going to bed. They certainly do. Basically the way they hunt is all about energy conservation. They catch something, they eat it, they save the energy, and then when they run out of energy or they run out of that food, they'll go and catch something else.
Yeah.
That's just how they work. So they're just curious. They don't associate humans with food. So when they come into a camp, they're not coming in for any other reason than they're just curious. Cats are curious. It's how cats at home work. Watch the way your cat at home works. That's how a lion and a leopard works in Africa. Totally fine. So know what you can. But if you're going with a guide, and that's the idea, if you choose to go with a guide so they can make you feel safe, and then a good guide will say, especially if you're confident enough, a good guide will say to you, next time you come back to Africa, hire a car and go and do it yourself. Don't spend the money to come with me again and see the same stuff, or maybe you will to go and see a different area with them. But if you want to go on a bit of an adventure on your own and feel wild and feel like you've actually experienced Africa and as an explorer yourself, then a good guide will train you what to look for and interpret everything you see throughout. And then when you come back for that second trip, then you'll be able to go, okay, this is really awesome. Now I can see that I know what to look out for. I know that this is how close an elephant can get, and so on. So, yeah, we could talk all day about it. It's one of my favourite topics, like I say. But, hyenas will come into camp. I sat in on another trip a few years ago where my eyes adjusted to the darkness quite quickly. I've just spent so much time camping, I know what to look for, and I saw these hyenas coming in, and I noticed that none of my clients had noticed them, and they were sort of just on the very edge of the light, about 30 metres out. And I watched them for about 10 minutes, and the idea of watching them was to be able to give me an idea of, okay, what are they doing? Yep. And all that had happened was basically we'd been in the area for a few days, so they'd found us and they knew that we were there, and they know that humans make fires, they know that humans eat foods, and we tend to be messy sometimes. We might leave bits of scraps out, or even hyenas like just biting stuff in general. They'll bite plastic, they'll bite bits of metal, they'll bite whatever, just because they're curious. And they don't have hands, so instead of feeling something with their hands, they test it with their teeth. Yep. And then they bite it and whatever. So you have to be careful about not leaving stuff around camp, because hyenas will, if you leave a camera on the table at night, there's a chance it won't be there in the morning, because they'll grab it. They're just testing it, and they'll chew it, and they'll wreck your camera. So,
I've actually seen photos on social media of people who have woken up and someone else has taken the photo because their camera was taken off and the hyena is still running around with it in its mouth.
Yeah, I've seen lions do it as well. It does happen, and those things are curious. That's just how they are. Yeah. You're a new element in their otherwise pretty normal in their normal world. So, of course, they're going to be curious. With those hyenas that were coming into camp, I had about 10 minutes of just watching them, and all they were doing was they were trying to see if they could come in and investigate and see if there was something they could steal, and that would give them some sustenance to survive until the next day. It was just survival for them. And after about 10-15 minutes of watching them, I said, okay, everyone, just be mindful that if you look out on the edge here, and it's hard to break it to people as soon as they hear you say, like, just be mindful. How do you possibly, like, hyena? You don't say it like that because that'll freak everyone out. But basically, okay, guys, look out in front of us, and you see those eyes of those bodies moving. They're not wildebeest anymore. They were wildebeest there before. They're not there. They are hyenas now. And all they're doing is they're curious. So I just keep doing what you're doing. Don't change your behaviour. Just stay exactly the same. Because as soon as you move, you might trigger them to react in a different way. So you just totally be normal. The more normal you are, the more you follow your normal routine, the better. But go with the guide and listen to what your guide says.
Yeah. I think if you maintain a safe distance, you respect them, give them their space, that's a good start. And an open safari vehicle is completely safe, but don't get out of the vehicle. Like we said, like you were talking about before, once you're outside of your vehicle, you're no longer seen as one, and then that's where you could potentially run into problems. Some of the places they actually say you're not allowed to get out of your vehicle. I guess don't antagonise the wildlife trying to get the perfect photo. Like I know of guides that throw ice at animals, and basically you're just pissing that animal off. So now you are affecting their behaviour in a way that they may not have reacted before. So what would you do if someone was throwing ice at you? You would lose it.
Yeah, that's important. That animal ethics is a huge thing. And again, if you're with a good trained guide who has their own ethics, or at least company ethics that should sort of guide the way that they do their job, they're not going to do those things. And that includes, like, don't throw stuff at them, don't slap the side of the vehicle, don't wolf whistle at them, or make those little kissy sounds like you do with your cat or your dog at home. Don't do that stuff. It totally changes their behaviour. Have a little bit of your own sense and just go, that guide's not doing the right thing. They shouldn't have. I know guides that have done that as well. I know guides that drive off-road when they shouldn't. And do the wrong thing. So you've got to totally be mindful of that. And if you're not happy with the way your guide is operating, we had a safari a few years ago where the only paid safari I've ever been on, and our guides found the animals really well, but they didn't interpret at all. So we'd drive up and find a leopard, and then they would spend the whole time on their phone. They just didn't care about the safari with us. They knew that we wanted to see animals. But after a couple of days of that, we just got over it. We just got over not learning anything about what we were there to see. And it was a waste of money. We got some nice photos, but we didn't learn anything new. We found a couple of lions on the road, and at that stage they thought, we haven't seen lions standing up yet. All the lions were sleeping, which is exactly what lions do during the day. And so they drove at them and they spooked them and made them get up. That was them showing us, this is how big a lion is. This is what a lion looks like when it moves, because we hadn't seen one standing yet. And that's totally wrong. You Don't do that stuff. So you're right, you don't affect the animal's behaviour by doing something yourself. It's just not on at all.
Well, yeah, walking safaris are a big one for people that are unsure. These are completely safe as long as they're guided by experienced individuals and you pick a good company. I mean, most of these guides have more experience of the environment they work in and the wildlife than you could ever learn on several trips. Unfortunately, bad news sells, like we've said, and I mean, most incidents I've heard of, which there's not been very many of at all, happened because limits of safe practice had not been followed. And when you get people who are ignorant of animal behaviour and flagrant disregard of rules, human and wildlife conflict will arise. That's just common sense. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but it's just, if you're going to put yourself in situations, just don't.
Yeah, use a little bit of sense, because that's not going to help the animal. It's not going to help you. It's not wise. All of that stuff. Yeah, I saw many examples in Kruger. Kruger's probably the busiest park in Africa. You know, there's even bitumen roads there now because it's such a high volume park. And yeah, people tend to push the limits there because they think, oh, this is our holiday. We've saved all our lives for this. We have a right to do this and get out of the car. And you know, what right do they have to tell us that we can't do this? And it's like, well, no. That a lot of the times, especially in Africa, the rules are there for a reason. It's because you don't understand the way an animal works, and it's too hard to train you how to do that if you haven't been with a guide or if you haven't ever been to Africa before. And there's a chance that you can fly into Johannesburg and within 3-4 hours of driving you can have hired a 4x4 and drive into Kruger. And it's a place where there's so many vehicles already. It seems like, oh, you're just on a drive. It's almost like that Jurassic Park again, where you're just on some tracks and you're not in a lot of control. You're just on the bitumen road and that's it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those animals have been around people for a long time, and sometimes their tempers can be quite frayed, especially some of the bigger elephants there. And if you've never driven around an elephant before and you suddenly see one coming and you start your car and you go to drive off, you might not know that that's the thing that triggers them to charge or even to bluff charge. And then if you suddenly do move, that opens you up for a danger when you should have not done that in the first place. So again, the message is really clear. Go with the guide for your first trip at least.
Yep.
Get a feel for it, and then after that, you should be sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I didn't do that, but yeah, I totally agree.
It depends what your background is. Just be respectful, and you said it before, respect is the biggest and the most important thing with animals. They're the ones, you're in their space now, not the other way around.
All right, now I've got a goodie. I am going to get bitten by a snake, a scorpion, or a centipede. You want to take this one?
It's one of those things, again, because I'm Aussie and everyone, especially if you're talking to Europeans and you say you're Australian, you're like, oh my goodness, you guys got all the most dangerous stuff in the world there. When I was researching coming to Africa and then going to Africa, like Australia might have, say, 9 of the 10 most venomous snakes in the world, and for any of those stats you like it. But then it's got the box jellyfish, which is, that has the highest toxicity of any animal anywhere on the planet. Yes, there's some dangerous stuff here, so yes, I have grown up around them and I have an awareness of what to do and how not to be unsafe. Even me with my background, I still found myself in Africa at night, barefooted with the scorpion running over my foot. You tend to become complacent, and I've been travelling for a long time at that point, and for some reason I was just complacent and I let my guard down that night, and it could have totally put me in a lot of trouble. And if you do that on an early trip, it could sour your experience of Africa as well. So I'd say the chances of it happening are very, very slim, but you just need to be aware. Always work on that sixth sense, always have that gut instinct, that feeling there, and just be aware. So wearing closed-in shoes eliminates most of those problems. If for some reason you've hung up a piece of clothing or you've left your shoes outside your tent at night, whatever you do, don't just put them on. Shake them out first, make sure that there's not a scorpion in there or a venomous spider or a snake. Just be very mindful. If you're going on a walking safari, your guide might be wearing short shorts or whatever, but you should probably try and be wearing long pants, because you don't know what the wildlife is like out there. You don't see compared to Australia, I've not seen near as many snakes driving around Africa, and having driven for so many years, I thought I would have seen more. But then you go into a park like the Kalahari Transfrontier Park that borders South Africa and Botswana, and it's nothing to see 10 snakes in a day in that place. It's a different environment. It's a dry environment, so they have to be more mobile, especially in summer months, to hunt their prey and to find their prey. Or if it's winter, they're sunning themselves on the road, so your likelihood of coming across them is a lot higher. If you're camping there is a chance that you'll see a snake and a scorpion and a centipede all in the one camping trip. That is a possibility, but
they're not actually looking to eat you or bite you. That's normally that's normally a reflex too. You either haven't seen them, you've stepped on them, or you're in their space and you haven't heeded to the warnings.
Totally, yeah. It's just them. It's them defending themselves. Again, it's down to survival for them. For us, we're just on a holiday. Like, we're literally having the time of our lives.
Yeah.
And when an animal responds the way it does, that's its life. Like, you're threatening it. So you just got to be mindful. Again, respect them. Understand there are dangers there. Do put whatever precautions you need to in place to make sure that you stay safe. And then just keep your space. Like, keep your distance and just be clever.
I never saw one at all. I mean, I saw 2 baby scorpions, but getting bitten, it's a rare thing. Like, it's sort of... Like, yeah. I lived in Australia for 3 years and I never saw a snake either. So, like...
yeah, for sure. Look, I agree, and I would totally say, like, I'll be clear that scorpions are one of those things that you need to be worried about in Africa. They are around. They're around more than they are in Australia.
Yep.
They are more venomous than they are in Australia. They will sting you, and if a big parabuthid, the ones with the really thick tails, do sting you, then you're in a world of hurt and a bit of trouble. So that's where it comes down to. In camp, do what your guide says. If your guide says wear closed shoes, don't walk around in pluckies or
jandals
or thongs or whatever you want to call them. You know, don't walk around barefoot, because that's silly. Like, I relaxed a little bit too much that time it happened to me, and I just totally gave myself a slap afterwards and just went, geez, mate, that could have been instant hospitalisation.
And you are by yourself. You just need to
be really wise. And I was on my own, so...
Yeah.
Silly. So just being smart about being out there, like, it's...
And if you are one of those people that are from a there's no snakes from your country, like New Zealand, there's no snakes, there's no scorpions, there's no real bities here, beside the odd spider. I mean... One really good piece of advice I had from a herpetologist was talk to the guide that's going to be on the ground with you when you get there, who's leading you a safari, and just ask them about snakes and scorpions, and ask them what their plan is for snake bites. So if they don't have one, then they should have one, because I mean it's very unlikely you're going to get bitten by one. But the possibility is there. But always, that's one question you can put to them if you are concerned. What is your snake bite strategy if someone gets bit by a snake? I mean, there's a few factors that go into that. Obviously, from the guide's perspective, like what type of snake, how many, blah blah blah. But I mean, that's a really good bit of advice if you are concerned. But it shouldn't. The thing is, it still shouldn't stop you from. It's not such an issue that. It's not manageable, and it's not... If you're aware, then you're aware, and it shouldn't stop you from going, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. It shouldn't be the reason that you don't go. You just need to be smart and be aware of what risks there are. All of them, All of these myths that we're breaking down right now, the message is super clear. Just do your research before you go and be really mindful of how to manage those different risks to eliminate or reduce the chances of anything happening to you. It's super simple.
Yeah.
A lot of you can totally ask your guides if they do have something like a snake management plan in place, and that's fair. Guides get asked 1,000 questions too. Remember, so we do hear a lot of different questions and questions asked 100 different ways, the same thing. So again, sort of be mindful of what everyone else has asked before, and also know that often there's a FAQ, or a frequently asked questions page, on most safari operators' websites, where a lot of those questions will be answered for you. And if you do ask them that question, then they should totally be able to answer that. But it should be done from a confident and a safe place going. Their answer shouldn't be, yeah, you're going to get bitten, or it shouldn't be that the guide is there to save you. It should be there that the guide is saying everything's under control. The reason that you're paying money for someone as a guide is because they're going to interpret all this amazing information, but it's also because they're going to keep you safe because they know how to be safe themselves.
Yeah.
It's their job, you know.
Yeah.
So.
All right, I've got a really easy one for you next. Well, I don't even know. I don't know the answer to this one, actually. Don't drive with citrus fruits in your car. Elephants can smell it and will make or break to get into your car. Have you heard of that? I haven't even heard of that.
I have.
Yeah?
Yeah, I have many times. I actually don't travel with citrus in my car for that reason. So it's pretty ironic that that's one of the myths that we're meant to be debunking. But I do put a bit of belief in that one. So
okay.
Basically, what it is that citruses have quite a strong smell. It's acidic, and it can travel on the air quite well. And there is a rumor that elephants do have a liking of certain things, and anything that smells stronger is totally going to potentially encourage animals into your camp, no matter whether they're elephants or hyenas or what they are. But it's one of those things that I just figured I could eliminate, so I never had any problems. I've heard of cases where elephants have reached their trunk into cars, and it's only going to be in the case where they're used to being around vehicles, because normally if an elephant is totally wild, it's not going to want anything to do with your car. But if it's in a park that's used to seeing quite a lot of vehicles, they're going to be quite accustomed to seeing a vehicle in their life every day. And I've heard of them reaching into cars for certain things, and those things being, for example, citrus fruits. That said, it doesn't mean that you can't, if a guy opens up a container of oranges like at a football game, you're not going to say no to them because you've been told that citruses are dangerous because they'll attract elephants. They're not going to break into your tent and try and get at you because you smell like an orange.
Gonna give you a kiss, yeah.
No, look, you can be overcautious and you can just try and manage a situation again. And look, I do believe that one a little bit. And again, it's the likeness of that is if you had meat laying around in camp, you know, if you have meat laying around, you're totally going to encourage predators because that's their food source.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't do that. Don't throw, if you're eating at night time, you're eating, you know, whether it's a vegan meal or a carnivore's meal, you know, if you're chucking scraps out away from, if you're sitting around a fire or whatever and you throw scraps out, that's why hyenas come into camp, and they will come in and they will get more used to humans, and they will then push the boundaries. And again, you mentioned the stats before around tourists coming into harm because of their interactions with wildlife. It's usually because tourists made the wrong. It's exactly the same as what we hear with croc incidences here in Australia. People that get into trouble and have an experience, a close call or worse with a crocodile, occurs because they've gone swimming at night time, or they've gone in an area where people have fed them and they've become habitualised to getting a free feed. And so then when they see you standing in the water, knee deep in the water at a boat ramp where people fillet fish and throw scraps out, of course they're going to see an opportunity. So it's the same in Africa. Just be wise. Make sure you don't throw scraps around camp. Make sure you just, you change your clothes. You keep your own hygiene up every day. You keep clean clothes. You do all that stuff. And just be mindful. So.
Okay, I've got a big one to do last, but the next one, and I'm going to give it to you because I think you'll have a great answer for this one. All the animals are being poached. They're all in decline. There you have it.
Okay, so this is another one of those questions, or another one of those things you often see, and a lot of the impressions that we make of what Africa will be like, we've got from books, or we've got from media, whether it's TV or radio or documentaries or novels that we've read, whether they're novels or they're non-fiction, whatever it is, we've made this impression in our mind of what Africa is going to be like. And a lot of the time, if you follow any African outfits, if you follow me, for example, you might not get exactly this flavour, but if you follow anyone who is a heavy conservationist or is very much about basically like what are the threats facing African animals every day, one of those things is poaching. Others are, for example, human habitation or the increasing urban sprawl of humanity that can totally impact on the wild areas left for an animal to live in. Animals will come and raid crops potentially. because that's an easy food source when their food source is being taken away because humans are growing villages or whatever it is. There's several threats to them, but poaching is one of the ones that is very well publicised in the Western world. We know that rhinos are poached at a pretty heavy rate in Africa, and yes, they are in decline in a lot of places, and that's bad. But we can't make up our minds and say that poaching is happening absolutely everywhere, and it's happening at such an unprecedented rate. And it's basically what we do when we talk about conservation is we say these things because basically the more dramatic we are, the more likelihood we have of convincing people to take action and do something. It's the whole climate change argument. Climate change is happening, but basically we keep using scare tactics to try and get people to adopt change, whereas it's not working anymore. We've cried wolf so many times that people don't understand it. And the issue of poaching, and you've talked to Ivan Carter, who knows this stuff far better than I do, but my impression is if we talk about poaching itself, the whole situation is so much larger than we actually understand. A lot of the time we get angry at the poachers themselves for doing the killing, whereas the issue is with the demand coming out of wherever it is, whether it's China or Vietnam or anywhere in the world that's demanding wildlife products. That's the issue there, is stopping that demand. But with poaching in particular, we often think that it happens everywhere. For example, in Botswana recently there was a post about, I think it was 87 or a number around that amount of elephants was suddenly killed in Botswana. But what we don't see is that Botswana has the most stable population of elephants anywhere in Africa, and their numbers are actually above the carrying capacity of that country right now. So there are places, for example, in Moremi, where the elephants are in such big numbers that they are doing more damage. There's so many of them that the nature, the environment can't sustain them, and they're just damaging the wildlife, or sorry, not the wildlife, but
it's not a balanced ecosystem.
Trees.
It's not a balanced
ecosystem. It's out of balance.
Yeah.
Once we've blown out carrying capacity, and a lot of the reason we don't then manage that population, or that population has got out of control, is because tourist dollar says that we will look after these animals because they're of such high value to us, because we want to see them and take photos of them. They're majestic and they're so special and all those things. But we've got to also leave that control in the hands of the ecologists and the scientists that know these places. So while people often get on and keyboard warrior other people who say, I've got videos of landscape that's absolutely denuded because elephants are in such big numbers that they're actually going to kill themselves because they've eaten all the available food, and that population will crash.
Yep.
And some people say we shouldn't interfere, but basically the bigger picture is the whole idea of nature conservation, poaching, and whatever else, these threats on animals, is not an easy answer in any case.
Nope.
A lot of people will say that black rhinos, they're all dying everywhere, they're all in terrible shape, their numbers are crashing. In some places in Africa, black rhinos are actually recovering. Their numbers are better this year than they were last year. Numbers of poaching are dropping, and that's because, yes, we are learning more about it, and we're putting more money into tourism, and then tourism feeds into anti-poaching patrols, which then equals better conservation. So tourism plays a huge role in the conservation of those species, but it's just a big picture. So before you go on and make an assumption about what you think is the case, again, do your research. Find multiple sources and understand the issue before blasting people. I've been hit so many times for saying, I believe that certain systems need to be managed in particular ways because of the impacts or whatever is going on in that situation. And people will say, that's not true. Do your work. I have a background in environmental science and in some ways ecology, and I'm a naturalist myself, so don't make the impression, or don't just assume that you know the answer. Get the big picture first. Yeah.
It's an interesting conversation, and
it's very complex, and it's one, I guess, outside of our chat in particular and breaking myths, but in terms of the myths around it, just know that the systems are very complex and animals are complex, and you just need to, again, if you're going with a guide, you're going to get all of that interpretation. You'll be explained how everything works and how everything's in fine balance. And
absolutely.
Sometimes now, because of humans and their role, we do have to intervene and help manage populations because they have blown out because of, essentially like not over conservation, but it's such a big complex issue. It's just not an easy fix in any case. So.
But they're not all dying. They're not all in decline.
No. And what we need to do is focus on the positives. I just too often hear all these examples of, if you look on IUCN Red List and you Google African elephant, you're just going to get depressed, and you're going to all the numbers that have been dying every year.
Yeah.
But what you've got to do is look at examples where that's not the case, and there's some really amazing conservation going on, and they're the ones we need to focus on, because if we're not positive about it actually being able to fix the problem, then no one's going to believe in doing something about it, and then it's just going to be left to the few passionate individuals that are out there every day that have seen the bigger picture and that are doing all the work to do it on their own.
Yeah.
All we've got to do is look at the positives and just go, yes, we can fix it, and we need to really focus on these awesome examples of how it is working, and it is working really well.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ivan Carter. Obviously, I know Ivan. There's really great examples of conservation that is actually, making populations of different species. For example, the Giraffe Conservation Fund, last year they had an operation called Twigger 4, where they introduced Nubian giraffe into an area where they hadn't had Nubian giraffe for over 30 years, and they introduced a population there, and that population every year they're doing that, and it's just rebalancing the ecosystem, which is fabulous.
Yeah, that's amazing, and that comes down to someone who knows that particular reserve or that particular place, knows the history of it and understands the ecology of it as well.
Yeah. That's
science informed. When they do that stuff, there's science behind it, so it comes from not a place of assumption, but these guys know what they're doing, and that's amazing. That's the stuff we need to be talking about, because media happens to love all of the chaos and the drama, when we'd all be happier and more well-rounded individuals if we also looked at the good sides as well. It doesn't mean that we're ignorant. We need to still be conscious of what bad things are going on and what the issues are. But yeah, it helps to be positive as well.
But it helps to look at the good as well. That there is, for every bad thing, there's a good thing happening. So yeah, okay.
Totally. Yeah.
The last myth and misconception we are going to address, and I think we've done a fabulous job so far. Okay. So, I know of a travel agent that works in Durban. Well, she used to work in Durban. And she couldn't even rattle off how many she had. Travellers coming into her office in the middle of the city asking where the wild animals were. And her answer was, I hide them under my desk. But that's quite funny. And I love her for that. But so one of the biggest misconceptions are that the wildlife is everywhere, including the cities.
Yeah, that's a common one, and even I'm a little bit guilty of it. I guess when I first flew over, I thought, I'm going to land in Johannesburg was where I was flying into, and then I thought, within pretty soon I should be able to go out and find elephants wandering around the bush somewhere, and
yeah.
And it's totally not the case. I flew into Johannesburg and flew into what's probably one of the biggest urban sprawls of any city in the world. Mm-hmm. It's just phenomenally big city, and it's that way because it's had humans living in that area for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's a reason that city's been so big, and it dates back to the gold rush and the gold boom in that particular area. So again, there's reasons for these places being the way they are, but yeah, you've just got to, again, the more you understand Africa before you go, the more you'll know how or what to expect when you get there. So basically how it works, especially in a sort of a more Western country like South Africa or Namibia, where they've had systems in place for a lot longer, or sort of political stability, or sort of Western influence, maybe even more so, all of their parks are fenced. Because number one, they want to stop poaching coming in. They want to be able to control poaching as much as possible. They want to make sure that the animals aren't... It's not that they don't want them to wander, but they're basically the way humans are now. We're spreading out so far in some places that we have to have parks to keep animals safe. We have a protected area system worldwide where basically every country anywhere in the world is obliged or sort of encouraged to protect 30% or 33%, a third of their land mass in protected area nomination, basically. So a third of every country should be under protected area management to keep wild places. That's environment, that's landscape, that's animals as well. Everything safe and preserved or protected basically for the long term. Because the way humans work, we use whatever resources we can get our hands on, and animals need to be safe and looked after in their natural habitat. So that's why when you fly into Johannesburg, you don't see animals straight away, because you've got to drive a few hours to get to Kruger, or a couple of hours in any direction to find a park, and then you still have to enter through a gate, and then the gate of that park is surrounded by a big fence, and it's safe. Animals are safe inside those parks.
Absolutely.
And that's done so they can also manage that population as a captive environment, essentially. It's not captive, it's not the right word, but basically in terms of it's a static population they can then manage, and they know how to look after certain aspects of it. If you go into a country like Botswana, it's the reason that I guide clients in Botswana and Tanzania, because they are more wild. There are a lot less fences out there, but the populations also work differently. There's less poaching in those places, for example. The poaching units work differently. There's different legal systems where prosecution of poachers is different. So basically, if you can walk through the main street of Maun and Kasane in Botswana, and you can see warthogs digging in the main street. You could, if elephants or lions wanted to, they could walk down the main street of Maun. There aren't any fences to stop them getting there. But they don't want to do that. They're wild animals. They don't want to be around humans because we're pests. We're like zooming around them in cars all the time. And we're eating all of their food, and we're hunting them, and we're bothering them, and we're taking photos of them. And they don't want anything to do with us. So they want to be wild and left alone. And we want our cities where we feel safe. So there's a beautiful natural divide there anyway. So yeah, if you fly into a remote place, and if you go with a guide or a company that has an outfit anywhere, basically, you'll either fly in or drive into that experience, and then from the moment you're within a lodge, even when you're landing in a plane, if you fly into the middle of a park, you will probably see elephants as you're landing, or giraffes, or all those sorts of things. But you've just got to be mindful and give your client or your guides an easier time too, and not have expectations that they're going to be able to find the animal straight away. They're animals. They're wild for a reason. They do what they want when they want. If they want to hide, if they're not in the mood, you're not going to find them. If the weather influences them, they might not be around. Whatever the case is, they're wild animals. So be kind to your guides. Give them a chance to find the animals, because they're the ones that know what they're doing. They've been doing this for however many years. Don't tell them how to do their job. Just let them do it, because they know what they're doing. And yeah, another one that you often see is because clients have a high expectation on their guides, the guides will zoom around and they'll drive way too fast, because they want to satisfy their clients, because their clients want to see the big five. They want to see an elephant and a black rhino and a lion all in one day. They're going to abandon their rules and their ethics and so on, and they're going to zoom around because that's what you're asking them to do. So again, if you're a client and you're in Africa, be mindful what you're asking of your guide. And if they do drive around too fast, or they're trying to do things for you because they want to make you happy, just tell them to chill out. Tell them that you're not in a huge rush. You rather enjoy the calm drive through a landscape as opposed to being pushed to drive really fast.
Yep.
I've felt that pressure myself, but more than that, I see a lot of other guides feel that, where basically they feel obliged to satisfy you, because it gives them a better tip. If they've helped you see everything, you're going to tip them more. So don't fall into that trap of encouraging people with big wads of dollars to say, I want you to drive really fast, really far to go and find that rhino, when it's not the right thing to do. So
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've done a wonderful job.
Yeah, that's been a big chat, and it's such a big emotional issue to cover.
It is.
So many people have, I find that, I don't know, I'd say the greater majority of people even save Africa for that part of their life as it's their highlight. It's going to be that experience that totally trumps everything else they've ever seen. For me, that was the case. It's why I put off Africa until later in my life, because I wanted I wanted to be more in control of the experience that I had, basically.
Yeah.
So I didn't go until much later for that reason. So it's such an incredible continent and such an amazing place full of diversity. And yeah, there's a reason people dream big about Africa, and there's a reason it captures you and it totally rocks your socks and blows you away. Yeah, just the more research you do in your own time to prepare yourself for that, the better your experience is going to be.
Yeah. All right. So if anyone has any questions for either myself or Shane, please feel free to send them through to me. All the links to contact both of us will be in the comments attached to the podcast. For Shane, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you? Would it be just to go to your website or email or social media? What would you like?
Yeah, the best way for me would probably be just jump on my website, which is www.raw-worldwide.com. But I've also got active Instagram and Facebook pages, which I'm sure we'll be able to put links up to.
Yep, absolutely.
If you're an Aussie, give me a bell. Call me anytime. I'd love to have a chat. One message that we've made pretty clear is that if you do go for your first time, you should ideally go with the guide. I wasn't saying that to push myself. I just think that if you're going to put so much weight in having an incredible experience and spending the money that you want value. You want quality over quantity. You want total value for your bucks. So do your research and pick someone that's going to suit your needs. If you want to go to a lodge, then go to a lodge and have that 5-star experience. If you are more hungering for adventure and you want to have that closer interaction with animals and you want that encounter that's close and still managed and safe to be the experience that you take home, that's what you go for. So choose someone who suits what you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Before our podcast concludes, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just want to say thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this such an amazing project that is My Heart Africa project. It's been an absolute blast to be here. I want to say a big thanks to Marilyn Young for nominating me to basically, or for putting my hand up for me when she met you for the first time. Marilyn's one of my clients from 2018 who I had an absolutely incredible great migration safari with, and hopefully we'll be safaring with again next year. So thank you so much to you and to her as well, and it's been an absolute pleasure. The questions you've asked have been phenomenal, and this is a topic that, as you can probably tell from my voice the whole time, if you've managed to listen the whole way through, you can tell how involved I am and how emotional and how much I love this subject, because it's something that I've seen and witnessed personally. And I want you to be able to go and live your dreams and have an incredible Africa trip, because everyone deserves that opportunity to do so. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, Shane, I just want to say a big thank you to you now, because that's my job. Without amazing people like yourself, this project could never have come about, and my love and passion for Africa could not be shared with the world on such a grand scale. So it's been truly my pleasure to chat with you again for the second time this week, but for today, I look forward to talking some more soon, hopefully around a campfire.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I look forward to it as well.
All right, Shane.
Thanks, Nikki. Legend. Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye.